Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Dave Dausch. I'm the Senior Director for Technology Advancement and Commercialization at RTI International. And RTI is a nonprofit research institute dedicated to improving the human condition by turning knowledge into practice. I'm pleased to be joined today by a panel of distinguished colleagues to discuss the promise and challenges of implementing decarbonization technologies to help limit global warming to 1.5°C. So first I'm going to introduce our panelists. First we have Fred Majkut to my left, Senior Vice President of Carbon Solutions at SLB. He currently oversees the global carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration business for SLB, including business development, engineering, commercial offerings, and strategic investments. Fred has been with SLB for 23 years, serving in a number of operational, technical, and managerial positions in the United States, France, Central America, North Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Is there anywhere you didn't go? And he was Director of Marketing and Strategy for SLB in the Asia Basin and executive sponsor of the SLB Asia Sustainability Committee. Next, we have Neva Espinoza on the other end. Neva is Vice President for Energy Supply and Low Carbon Resources at the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI. Neva leads a team focused on the research, development, and application of technologies for safe, reliable, and affordable power generation while supporting energy transformation in the power system. She also leads EPRI's Low Carbon Resources Initiative in partnership with the Gas Technology Institute to accelerate the development and deployment of low carbon technologies. And finally, we have my colleague at RTI, Samir Parvathakar, in the center. He is Director of Renewable Energy and Energy Storage. He leads several U.S. Department of Energy and commercially funded programs on green chemicals production and grid-scale energy storage, including a pilot-scale clean energy and chemicals hub to produce zero-carbon hydrogen and ammonia from intermittent renewable energy. Samir also leads R&D efforts in thermochemical energy storage for concentrated solar power, distributed and renewable gas to chemicals technologies, and cleanup technologies for syngas derived from waste and fossil fuel feedstocks. And we were hoping to have a fourth panelist, Candice Valsing from she's Senior Advisor for Climate for the United States Agency for International Development. Unfortunately, Candice is stuck in traffic. We were hoping that she will be able to join us partway through the panel if she can get through security. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm going to just start with a few remarks. Been hearing a lot at COP that the reality is that fossil fuels will likely continue to be used in the short term. You'll hear today from our panel about how we can utilize fossil fuels in a cleaner way with cleaner processes to reduce their environmental impact. We've also heard a lot about methane. So I wanted to also emphasize the importance of continued focus on CO2 mitigation. While methane is a more potent greenhouse gas, it's about 80 times more potent than CO2. CO2 is more than 100 times more abundant in the atmosphere and persists for longer periods, whereas methane is a shorter term gas. So from a power, to utilize methane, which is one of the strategies for mitigating methane emissions, in a combustion process, you're actually creating CO2. So we can't lose sight on CO2, especially for hard-to-abate sectors like power, cement, iron production, chemicals production, which are also heavy CO2 emitters. So it's very important to focus on decarbonizing for these sectors, and also it's critical for meeting our global climate goals, mitigation goals. So I'm going to start with our panel questions, and the first question is for each of you. If you can tell us about your organization's focus on developing and implementing solutions for decarbonization and how these efforts will contribute to net zero carbon emissions. We'll start with Fred.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So first of all, maybe let me introduce a bit SLB, because not everybody may have heard of SLB. We used to be called Schlumberger until October 2022. So we rebranded the company at the time, and effectively one of the missions for rebranding the company was to make sure that we're embedding sustainability in pretty much everything we do. And I must say that's very much the case today. So in the last 3 years, we've taken a number of key directions associated with sustainability and reducing emissions. So as a matter of fact, we were one of the very first companies to announce a net zero inclusive of the 3 scopes. Scope 1 and 2 is, as you can imagine, operational emissions, but Scope 3 emissions as well were included in our 2050 net zero, which by itself is a big challenge. I mean, 95% of our emissions as a technology company are Scope 3 emissions. Today, as an organization, what do we do to drive emissions down? We have really three main levers. One, we look at our operational footprint and our operational emissions, and we work on that. We've taken an objective to bring these emissions down 30% by 2025 on a 2019 baseline. And today we were already down 23%, so I think we're well underway. And a lot of the actions are very simple actions. We're electrifying our fleet of vehicles. We are looking at the type of power supply we're having for facilities. We're looking at idle time and how much fuel consumptions we can reduce and so on. So reducing operational emissions, reduce their emissions. So we're working with customers and effectively how can we reduce their emissions? It comes in miscellaneous form. So methane detection, methane measurement, methane monitoring is one. A lot of our customers are exploration and production oil and gas companies. So obviously methane is one big item on their list. The other thing that we're doing in order to reduce our customers' emissions is effectively develop technologies that have a much lower carbon footprint when they're being used, which reduces our Scope 3 emission and reduces our customer Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And the last big lever is we're developing technologies to engineer the energy systems of the future. This is where hydrogen, geothermal, critical minerals, carbon capture and storage, energy storage are for us now. We've created an entire business around new energies, and that's effectively the third lever that we are using to drive emissions reductions.
Great. Terrific. Thank you, Fred. Neva, you want to go next?
Sure. So thank you for having me here, David. I'm so excited to be with all of you for the next 25 minutes or so. I'm from EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute. We're a nonprofit research and development organization that really focuses on the clean energy transition from end to end across all different parts of energy. And we do that on kind of two core things we look at. One is we're looking at ways to de-risk tomorrow's technologies today. So thinking about things like advanced nuclear, like electrolyzers, like long duration energy storage technologies, and certainly carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, all being part of tomorrow's energy future. What can we be doing right now to advance those technologies? We're also looking at ways on how to de-risk today's technologies for tomorrow. So a lot of the technologies we have on the ground today, our current nuclear fleet, our current gas fleets in many parts of the world, will continue to be part of this transition moving forward, and we need to find ways to reduce their carbon intensity and maintain the affordability and reliability of the system.
Great. Thanks, Neva. Samir.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our session. I'm Samir Parvatikar from RTI. We are a nonprofit research institute as well, with our mission to improve the human condition by turning knowledge into practice. Our focus on decarbonization is quite multifaceted. We have several different business units that focuses on different solutions to decarbonization. In our technology advancement group, we develop novel technologies in areas from carbon capture to green hydrogen production, green ammonia production, and how can we use those systems for long duration energy storage, sector coupling with agriculture for fertilizer production, and also how can we use solid fuels how can we make fuels from solid feedstocks like wastes, right? Municipal solid waste, agricultural residues, and so on and so forth. We also have an international development group where we focus on implementing clean energy solutions and improving resilience across various geographies. We are in Latin America, the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South and Southeast Asia, where we're working with utilities, governments, and communities to make sure we can implement solutions that are unique from for a local standpoint, and also ensuring that those implementations happen in a just fashion. Back home in the US, we also have our social statistics and environmental sciences group where we focus on things like developing tools and methodologies to measure industrial pollutants, monitor GHG monitoring systems, and so on. So we have a lot of breadth and depth to address pretty much all challenges for climate change.
Great. Thank you, Samir. Our next question. So for all the panelists, more specifically, what new technological approaches do you believe are needed to provide the greatest impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions for hard-to-abate industries? And we'll start with Neva.
Sure. So, this whole decarbonization challenge, when you think about it in terms of the entire economy, there's not a silver bullet. I think we all know that. So fundamentally, I think we need to focus on keeping all technology options on the table. So I like to say optionality is not an option, it's a requirement, and we need to really make sure all those technologies are staying out there. Now, one of the approaches that I think is going to be really important is to really focus around net zero industrial clusters. So industrial clusters, EPRI has a partnership with the World Economic Forum where we're really focused on how can we take a more holistic approach on a local economy-wide basis to achieve a net zero economy. So if you think about the idea of an industrial cluster, this is not a new concept. The world's economy is based on industrial clusters, co-located companies that located that way for a variety of reasons: workforce, transportation, natural resources, etc. Industrial clusters today represent about a third of the economy-wide CO2 emissions. So addressing economy-wide decarbonization with a cluster focus is really a great target, and it allows us to understand different complementary strategies that may happen across sectors. So it doesn't focus on any one sector. It also doesn't focus on any one technology approach. You will need things like energy efficiency, increased electrification, utilization of carbon capture sequestration, looking at how different low carbon resources, hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic fuels, may all play into a more economy-wide approach and really help those harder to abate sectors meet their overall decarbonization goals.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Next, we'll go to Fred.
Okay. So first of all, I totally echo what Neva mentioned on industrial clusters. I think this is a fundamental part of a pragmatic journey to really reduce massively emissions. I think there's a number of good initiatives that are taking place around specific clusters, but I think the challenge today is how do we scale it? So you have, let's take one cluster, for instance, the net zero, it's called Net Zero Teesside in the UK, which is very much an example of a cluster where companies are getting together behind anchor tenants and effectively building an infrastructure, building an ecosystem that can help decarbonization at scale. The challenge today is this is still very sparse. We don't have enough of those taking place, right? So that's one. I think when it comes to as well what's required in order to make that happen, I mean, obviously, scaling up of some of these technologies, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's CCUS, is a fundamental challenge today. I mean, we've been talking of CCUS for decades, and today you could argue that it's still not scaled. I mean, there's, I think, 49 million tons, the latest figure, of CO2 that's being abated a year. I mean, this is 0.1% of what's out there. So it's still, despite being a known technique, not something that has managed to scale. For miscellaneous reasons, I mean, lack of policies and regulations, public acceptance, but as well fundamental economics, i.e. who pays the bill. Hydrogen as well is a bit of a challenge when it comes to scaling up, and I think one of there's two sides to the issue, one which is the supply side and the other one which is the demand side. But I think fundamentally the demand side is the more challenging piece in the sense that so far the demand for hydrogen from an offtake standpoint is still not there, i.e. people are still not feeling comfortable to sign offtake agreements for hydrogen for the long run, which proves to be a challenge for hydrogen producing companies, the industrial gas companies, or even technology companies behind them. And overall, I mean, I think when we look at it for us, at least from a technology standpoint, what we're trying to, or what we're putting our focus on is how can we help unlock some of this. And I think one fundamental piece what technology can help or what technology innovation can help is actually in enhancing economics or in disrupting economics associated with this. Everyone complains that CCUS is too expensive today. Can do it. The cost per ton is just impractical. The end users will not pay for it. Everyone complains of the cost of hydrogen. So we have a number of, let's say, initiatives or technology initiatives taking place with the main goal being to reduce the cost of producing hydrogen, to reduce the cost of carbon capture. As a matter of fact, we have a carbon capture project with you guys in RTI, where RTI International for, I think it's 12 years, has been working on developing a chemistry, a disruptive chemistry, to enable or to make possible the capture of carbon dioxide from industrial emissions at a fraction of the energy requirement that typical amine systems require. So we partner with companies like RTI, and we industrialize that technology in order to make it a system. And very much this is what we're trying to do in order to help the economics associated with carbon capture, with hydrogen, and hopefully support their scale up, which is today is still fundamental challenge out there.
All right, thanks, Fred. Samir, technological approaches.
Yeah, I think just to highlight what Neva and Fred said, these centralization or co-locating some of these generation, how do you decarbonize the generation side of power as well as other sectors, right? Building materials, steel, cement, fuels, fertilizers, all of those. We're seeing a lot of movement, and Fred mentioned that example in the UK. We're seeing similar movement in the US as well, the hydrogen hubs, which the US Department of Energy has announced, and we're moving forward with, and we've seen some results out there. Those seem like very promising regional approaches where you're trying to look at what are use cases, downstream use cases from the production utilization use cases in different geographies within the US. I think those are great approaches, but we also need to remember that hydrogen storage is still a challenge. Not all geographical areas have access to low-cost hydrogen storage. So there are a lot of challenges there. Can we reduce the cost of hydrogen storage, or can we also reduce how we operate some of these downstream processes so we can reduce the amount of hydrogen that's stored? That could be everything from looking at new ways to make these these chemicals and fertilizers and others, where they can be more responsive to renewable energy themselves, and other means like that. And of course, we cannot forget carbon capture. Both our Fred and Neva talked about that. And another area that I can see that's going to be critical is if we can start electrifying some of these process industries, right? Fossil fuel is used quite extensively to provide process heat for producing chemicals. And if there was a way we can capitalize on some of the decarbonized power generation and electrify our process equipment, that could be great progress as well.
Great. All right. Thank you, Samir. So next question, and I think we'll start with Samir, so back to you on this one. Fred talked about some of this as well, but how can we overcome some of the technological challenges that we encounter to accelerate the readiness of new solutions toward commercialization and implementation?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you talk about clean tech, in certain markets like the US, there is a lot of financing that is available. It could be VC money. There's plenty of VC money. Of course, they come with certain trade-offs, right? You giving up equity. There is expectation of a rate of return on that, unless you're a VC with the philanthropic arm, let's say the Breakthrough Energies of the world. Or you have the U.S. federal government that's invested a lot in new technology development. One could claim that DOE money flows like honey, right? A little slow. But there are a lot of avenues for financing of some uh, uh, clean technologies. But the challenges as you start scaling up are different based on what stage of technology development you're at. When you're starting to think about how do you scale from an innovation you have demonstrated in the lab, say with the university or at a startup, how do you take that and pilot it? There are certain challenges there. Like it's all a lot more on the engineering side. Can you pilot it? All right, we work with a lot of these startups and universities and help them with both the engineering know-how on how you scale these and also providing facilities. These are typically capital-intensive efforts to pilot a technology, so not everyone has to invest in these facilities. So if you partner with the right folks, and then you can do some of these pilot demonstrations. But when you take the next step of going from pilot to commercial, it's a totally different ball game now, right? Now you start to think about bankability of projects, and you start to think about challenges like, okay, now I have to worry about what the supply chain looks like, right? How do you do permitting, right? How do you do siting and permitting becomes an issue. And then can can you have a long-term offtake, right? These are real challenges that maybe not all new tech and new startups are used to, and maybe that's not required as well. A lot of engineering companies like Fred's, that's what they do on an everyday basis. So can we learn from them? Can we lean on them? Can we partner with these companies so that we don't reinvent the wheel? So I think that will be one of the challenges. And then to address the offtake, right? I think Fred mentioned there is already a little bit of challenge in trying to understand how offtake happens with green hydrogen. And having worked in the green ammonia space with a lot of both fertilizer manufacturers and other potential users of clean hydrogen, there is certainly some hesitance there. The IRA in the U.S. is providing incentives for hydrogen production tax credits. We don't know the details just yet or how it will be applied, and a lot of uncertainty there. But these are typically projects that are over 30 years, and your incentives are for the first 10 years, right? So we have to think about economics at that point and think about, okay, how does a project become financially whole at the end of these incentives? Can you have a profitable business afterwards? And you're seeing something similar with the sustainable aviation fuel market. You're obviously a lot of demand from the airlines. I think, what was it last week, that there was a transcontinental flight from New York to London, I guess, from Virgin Atlantic that used a sustainable aviation fuel. But we can't provide enough of it. There's probably not enough used cooking oil, which is the typical feedstock that we use for that. But there are a lot of companies exploring different technologies and different pathways to make SAF. But but when you're starting to turn that into a bankable project, you have to think about the long-term offtake. Airlines are not used to buying fuel years in advance, right? So those are questions I think we have to think about. So kind of long-winded answer, but we might have the technologies, but we need help from large engineering companies who are used to building projects, but also the economics has to make sense as well.
Great. Thanks, Samir. So we'll let Candace jump in since glad you made it. We know it's a challenge. So we've been talking about technological approaches that for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, some of the technological challenges. We also had everyone sort of talk about their organization and what they're doing to develop and implement solutions. So maybe any of those topics you want to jump in on and talk about USAID's efforts.
Sure. Thank you, David, and apologies for being late. So Candace Valsing from USAID. So we come a little bit from a different approach. Obviously, USAID, we're the ground game in many of the technology solutions. So what we're really trying to do is think through how you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in the United States, probably the largest investment in clean energy technology in the world. How can we take that engine of growth that's happening in the United States? How can we translate that into benefits for developing countries? We've seen industrialization happen already, but how on clean energy? But how can we really make sure there's a value add in the partners that we work with in Africa and Asia? So when it comes to decarbonization technologies, I often hear from people, well, it's not ready. They're not ready yet. They're not ready yet for the countries that you're working in, but that's actually not true. So we've been working with the National Renewable Energy Lab at the Department of Energy and other partners across the federal government to scale up training, to identify capacity building for things like hydrogen, for ammonia. When it comes to hydrogen, we're very focused on high integrity hydrogen that comes from renewable energy and other sources, and see the benefits of obviously large scale ups in ammonia. So trying to build the technical capacity, the training and the partnerships with a few countries to start, but really thinking broadly, how can we again translate those benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act to developing countries, to the emerging markets, and help catalyze them in collaboration with the Ministries of Energy and the Ministries of Finance in more than 80 countries.
Great. Thank you, Candace. So I guess moving on to the next question, I'll start with Neva. So many green energy solutions, Fred talked about this, the cost is an issue, and the technology maturity and market adoption is not quite there yet compared to traditional fossil fuel approaches. So what is needed to facilitate adoption and use of these technologies?
So it could go a lot of places with that answer. So I'm going to kind of combine the two questions, the question you asked Samira a little bit ago. But so to me, it has to all be based in collaboration and learning from each other. So, we talk about scale, and I think you said we can't all recreate the wheel. Well, part of not recreating the wheel is to have the standard spokes that are consistent from wheel to wheel to wheel. And what does that look like? Well, when you think about building and scaling new technology, it can look like a standard set of design specifications for different use cases, procurement specifications, materials specifications, and databases. It can look like different codes and standards across different parts of the energy economy. So you can see these things be reproduced time after time after time. And the way you do that is from day one, actually from day zero, collaborating, sharing data, sharing information, so you can accelerate and create those spokes of the wheel, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time.
Great. Thanks, Neva. I'll come back to Fred. And so, either the last two questions, sort of looking at how do we overcome these challenges? How do we overcome the cost challenges? How do we drive these solutions toward commercialization, implementation, and adoption?
So let me maybe make a few answers since there's a lot of questions at once. So maybe to start on the cost front, it's true. It's there is obviously a cost associated with decarbonization. On the other end, today, when you look at specific examples, for instance, let's take Europe. Today, from proven technologies, from existing technologies, about half of Europe emissions can be abated at a cost below the carbon price. Meaning, if you take the European ETS as a benchmark, half of European emissions can be actually abated below that level, that costing point, right? So there's already a lot that can take place with what's existing today. That's an important thing. Now, when we look at specific levers of decarbonization, going back maybe to the hydrogen angle, maybe going to the carbon capture and sequestration angle, it's clear today that the economics associated with those levers are, to some extent, challenging. Now, these are sectors, or these are, I would call that technology verticals where public capital has to unlock private capital. And we see that in the US. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is actually catalyzing that. We're seeing that in Europe as well with some of the EU innovation funds, but it's fundamental. I mean, governments, public capital needs to unlock private investments. And it's taking place right now, but obviously the momentum needs to be there, and the focus behind the government initiatives, be it the IRA, be it some of the loans that are being made available, some of the grants that are being made available for first-of-a-kind type systems, needs to translate into something material. I think when it comes to the challenges associated with scaling up, there's still a lot of room for improvement in failing fast and moving on fast. When you look at what's happening in some of those technology verticals, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of initiatives taking place out there, and fundamentally, I think a lot of us are still becoming too emotional when it comes to moving on. That initiative doesn't work, we should move on. And I think the process there and what, for instance, the DOE is doing in the US is very good, which means they're incentivizing, they're bringing capital forward in order to accelerating some of those initiatives and effectively screening which ones of the first of a kind can translate from a pilot to a demonstration, and from a demonstration to actually a full-scale system, which and you would say that moves your technologies alongside the technology readiness level quite systematically. So it's happening. Is it happening fast enough? Is it happening globally enough? Definitely not. But I think at least today in the US, I can say that the IRA and the BIL have been transformational, no doubt.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a good way to come back to a good segue to come back to Candace. And can you talk about the challenges of cost? You mentioned the challenges of country readiness, developing countries versus larger economies. What will it take for adoption of some of these technologies to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already doing that. I talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's both tax credits in there for hydrogen, but then there's also hubs where we're, I think a few months ago we announced the solicitations for, I think, 6 hydrogen hubs across the United States, and so we are trying to look at this from a multiple different angle of driving down the cost curve through a series of subsidies through tax credits, through subsidies through grants, through technology transfer, through we've done, even before IRA was passed, our loan program office was issuing loans for innovative hydrogen technologies. So all of that's happening in our domestic agencies through the Inflation Reduction Act. But then, to bring that over to USAID, and how do we drive the costs down, and how do we increase access? As I said earlier, we are at the point where we're trying to get ready for the technologies to be to come, right? And so how can we do training? How can we create partnerships? So when we're ready to open up obviously India, like I said, is far along on hydrogen, but when we're ready to open them up in other countries, how can we do that readiness? How can we actually make sure we have the people on the ground? And how can we help also? I'm sure you guys touched on this earlier, but how can we help diversify supply chains? So I feel like a lot of these innovative technologies are, there's massive discourse right now about critical minerals and supply chains, and these technologies that we're talking about today are really an opportunity to diversify and, poke through some of those arguments that we're having about, not all the technologies, but some of them, poke through some of the arguments about supply chains and some of the consternation that's happening around there. So, how do we decrease prices? I think we're all doing that. We've seen it happen with solar and wind and other technologies. Like 15 years ago, we saw cost curves drop dramatically. Now we're seeing that start to drop. We've got the incentives in place, so it's just everyone working together. Creating the enabling environment, we're hoping to get out the guidance for the tax credits soon, and then moving from there.
Great. I'm going to go, we have some time, so I'm going to go a little bit off script, and we'll start with Samir. Think on the fly. Talk about the transition from an oil and gas economy to renewables, some of these new technologies. EPRI works a lot in grid technologies, which are traditional fossil fuel power sources. SLB was formerly an oil and gas services company. RTI, we've worked in a lot of traditionally fossil fuel type of projects like, that we're sort of transitioning to, for example, converting methane to other sources of energy. And so, Samir, can you talk about some of that transition strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, 20 years ago, our group within RTI, we were all about coal, right? How do we create new technologies for cleaning up coal emissions, how do you get a cleaner IGCC plant, right? How do you clean up syngas? How do you make the efficiency of of a coal-fired power plant? How do you get that cleaner? So yeah, we've been working on that, and then slowly we've started with carbon capture. As Fred said, when we first started with our carbon capture development, technology development, that was 13, 14 years ago now. And back then, the funding was primarily at the lower TRL levels, and now we're starting to see more funding for pilots, and that took a long time, right? I think there has been a lot of support from the U.S. federal government to do that, to push technologies and try to do the R&D approach before going there. So I think those have been really interesting. And I think there are also challenges as we start introducing a lot more renewables onto the grid. How do we do grid balancing? I think Arshad talked yesterday about how long it takes to get transmission lines in. And so how is that going to work? So the U.S. government is working, and we're working with them on islanded grids for power to X, right? Those are solutions that we don't necessarily need to be connected to the grid, and those solutions that we're developing for different reasons. I think there's a statistic that grid connections, the time it takes for a project to get connected to the grid has doubled over the last 5 years or so. And so those technologies that we are developing here could translate overseas as well in areas where it might be more challenging to develop new grids and things like that. So yeah, I think so part of that is also how do we transfer technology to other countries. I think as Candace mentioned, we're working with USAID and other organizations to see if we can do some reverse trade missions where we can demonstrate some of the technologies that we've developed here, try to look at how the technologies that we're developing here could be used in other developing country contexts as well. Right now, RTI has invested internally on trying to look at how some of our green hydrogen and ammonia technologies could be used in sub-Saharan Africa, right? I think those are a few examples of how that transition has been taking place over the years.
Great, thanks, Samir. Neva?
Yeah, so, this next phase of the energy transition, this is an infrastructure play. So, Candace, you talked about how much we've seen the cost of solar, for example, solar, wind, with those cost reductions have come down over 80% over the past couple years, right? It's amazing. Well, guess what? The grid is full, right? We're not accepting any more parties. We're full. We're not taking anyone else. And that's a little facetious, but the idea is we need to build infrastructure, right? Even to install more solar, more wind, more batteries, we need infrastructure, grid infrastructure to do that. Carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, needs CO2 transport, needs CO2 storage infrastructure. Hydrogen, FYI, that's a whole new economy. You need production infrastructure, storage and transport infrastructure. So this next play is really an infrastructure focus. So yes, there's a cost of driving down technologies, and we're going to do that because we know how to do that. But building infrastructure, I think, is really under-focused on and is going to be a huge part.
Great, yeah, really interesting point. Fred?
I have to echo that. I think the challenges around building infrastructure, but actually the focus around building that infrastructure is probably not there or not sufficiently there. I think it's very obvious right now when you look at the timeline associated with bringing new renewable capacity online. I think as well it's visible when it comes to when you look at what's required to scale carbon capture and sequestration. The fact is there is a major shortage of pipelines now, despite everything that's going on, despite the drive and the targets that are being set. You have a number of projects today that are not moving or are not going through final investment decisions because of lack of pipelines. And without pipeline, nobody would want to invest to develop a CO2 storage site. And without a CO2 storage site and without a pipeline, nobody will invest into developing or into spending hundreds of millions of dollars in developing a carbon capture facility. So there's a bit of a catch-22 situation there, similar on the hydrogen. So I think this fundamentally the infrastructure challenge is underestimated. It is a major hurdle at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Candace?
Yeah, great points. And, you know, we have a bipartisan infrastructure law, which included a lot of funding on hydrogen. So you're completely aligned in terms of infrastructure. When it comes to developing countries, though, I think there's a lot we can learn by what we've gone through in the United States as we're doing that transfer. So localization, you know, thinking through how we can make sure that projects take local equities into account as we're doing the technology transfer. We've seen how this play in the United States. We've seen, you know, various different groups align for or against certain decarbonization technologies. It's incredibly important that we are thoughtful, you know, as we're moving to developing world and including local thoughts in terms of the development of build out. Also thinking about co-benefits, reducing air pollution, increasing water quality. How, as we're building out decarbonization technologies across the world, how can we also generate co-benefits and communicate those co-benefits? Because some of these technologies do have very real co-benefits that, you know, are going to be helping the folks on the ground. And then I guess the third point would just be, you know, again, just thinking through how can we learn through, you know, there's permitting is obviously a very hot topic in the United States when it comes to infrastructure. So how can we bridge those, not only the actual driving the cost down as we're trying to expand this technology globally, but learn from some of the more bureaucratic and community building issues that we've had around some of the technologies here as we try to transition these technologies globally.
Great. Thank you. So I've got one more question, and we can open it up to any questions from the audience. But Neva mentioned earlier there's no one silver bullet, which of course there isn't. But I'm going to ask each of you to pull out your magic wand. And if you could make one change in the global market, in the technological landscape to help limit global warming to 1.5 C, what would you do? Neva?
First time.
I don't know. Are you first?
Candace can't lead.
I'll go
Fred?
first.
Either one of
Let
you.
me take a stab at it.
Fred, go ahead. Yes.
No, I mean, for me, I mean, the statement, and to go back to my initial comment on saying, for instance, half of European emissions today can be abated at a cost below carbon price. It shows that we really can do a lot today. I think we should not wait for perfect solutions to be ready, because there will never be perfect solutions. There's always been things that can be better. And very much there's a lot of technologies, there's a lot of techniques out there that are implementable today. And I think really my key message is let's not wait, right? Because today we do see a number of regions in the world, even though the policies are there, the regulations are there, where there's still, I would say, a lack of momentum in taking final investment decisions on projects, even though you could say all the ingredients are there. So time is of essence here.
Yeah, for sure. Neva, you want to go?
Fine.
You ready?
I'll go. I was ready. I just shouldn't have to go first. I'm kidding. But so I think it's collaborative approaches to de-risk technology, and that's not just in terms of what EPRI does, because we do a lot in that space, but it is thinking through, we know we're going to need all these solutions. We know we're going to need nuclear units. We know we're going to need carbon capture. We know we're going to need hydrogen or some type of low carbon fuel. Why are we all going at it alone? So, you know, can we really focus together and say, okay, we're going to build X amount of these units. We're going to buy down this risk together in different regions of the world, and we're going to accelerate the curve that we know it takes in order to deploy and scale technology. Because there's going to be risk and there's going to be failure. And we need those failures to happen to get to the successful future. And so really looking at it kind of through a different collaborative lens to buy that down somehow, I think is really important.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Samir?
So, you know, obviously we're working hard at the carbon problem, be it carbon from carbon as CO2, methane, any of that. I think one thing maybe is I hope we don't, we think about any unintended consequences, right? Let's not trade the carbon problem for whatever other problem we have next. Maybe it's critical minerals, right? Let's not trade one problem for another. So if there is a magic wand, I'd say, well, hopefully I use that to not have unintended consequences.
Yeah, good one. Candace?
This isn't very sexy, but just in terms of building off of your collaboration approach, before I was at AID, I was at Office of Management Budget, managed a portfolio of $300 billion and interacted a lot with a lot of loan programs across the U.S. government, and have since come to more the international space. But in seeing those two sides interact, and just thinking about the global interest that there is in investments in clean energy technologies, honestly, the simplest thing, which is we could do, is just literally a list of an open source list of all of the different companies that need investments in clean energy technologies, whether it's decarbonization or otherwise, because we have so many different organizations, financing institutions across both the U.S. government and other governments. And I hear often that there's no pipeline. We don't have a pipeline. That's not true. There's pipeline. So we took this approach to permitting within the United States. We have a permitting dashboard where everyone who wants to get a project permitted, they put it on a website. Everyone can see it. Everyone can see how long it takes. I really do feel like we need some sort of open source collaborative list where you could see all the different financing agencies across the world could see different types of investments. I know there's a lot of reasons not to do that in people's interests, but I do think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, it does. I think we've heard that here at COP, is the linking the investment to the solutions. That's why we're all here, right? This is not an easy thing to solve. So, yeah, an eBay or something for or whatever. So yeah, we have a few minutes. So if there are any questions from the audience, and I think this was our mobile microphone. So if there are any questions, we can hand the microphone around. Anyone? All right, we have a couple.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Actually, my question has two parts. The first one is that the transporting decarbonization, and you alluded to that, in my opinion, can only be achieved with a strong reduction in demand. So what are your comments on that? And then the second part of the question is, strategic minerals are a serious limit to the expansion, for example, of electric vehicles. So is that something that technologies are currently looking at, like new technologies, or how do you answer that like limitation? Thank you.
Anyone want to jump in?
I can take a stab at least at the second part of the question. I think, as you point out, access to critical minerals. So in the case of EV or EV batteries, I think lithium would be the one that comes to mind first. And it's true that today, when we look, for instance, at the projection in lithium demand versus supply, there is a shortage probably 10, 15 years from now, right? And obviously, lithium comes from a number of sources, comes from mining, comes from brine. And yes, technology, I think, has a role to play. So, for instance, there's quite exciting technology development on direct lithium extraction out of brines, which do come not only at a fraction of the environmental footprint that traditional. Today, you extract lithium whether from mining or from evaporation ponds, which both of them have a very significant environmental footprint. Now, there are technologies out there which are at pilot/demonstration stage that allow to do that, i.e. extract lithium from brines at a fraction of the water footprint, at a fraction of the land footprint, and effectively as well enable to make lithium extraction economical in what would not be economical under standard techniques. So this is the type of example, for instance, where technology can not only help economics, but as well protect the environment at large alongside the supply of critical minerals like lithium. And you could expand that across other minerals as well, yeah.
Anyone want to comment on electric vehicles? Or?
Yeah, so I'll add some comments in there. So a couple of things. When we think about the energy economy we're going to, that energy economy is significantly, we use less energy per capita than we do today because we're fundamentally shifting to technologies like electrification that are significantly more efficient. Like above and beyond, when you see graphs that show the difference, it's startling how much more efficient it is to use things like electricity, vice a fossil fuel for things like transportation. So that's fundamentally part of it. The other thing I think we're seeing as a kind of a mega trend across the entire world is really a push to things like more transportation, use of social transportation, things like Uber and Lyft, et cetera, which all changes how the demand of transportation works across the entire energy economy. And we're going to continue to see things shift as we, as we see everything progress. So I think that you don't necessarily need to have less demand, but the demand will be different, and the amount of energy used for transportation will be significantly less in the long run. The other thing I'll add in terms of lithium, I think Frederick did a fantastic job answering, but we are also, as an energy economy, a lot more intentional in the design and the manufacturing of different components, understanding what end of life looks like, embedding end-of-life strategies in terms of reuse and recycling in these components, way more than we ever have been in the past. And you just talked about Schlumberger rebranding to SLB, and part of that sustainability. Well, sustainability is now part of goals across all of these organizations that are really trying to drive a more sustainable use of materials as we move forward. So I think you're going to continue to see improvements in that space as well.
Yeah, I think.
No, I just want to make comment on the critical minerals. RTI International is leading in the Philippines a USAID Energy Secure Philippines project, and we're going to lead the circularity of critical energy minerals in the Philippines, and we're focusing on two: electronic waste from renewable energy and electronic waste from energy efficiency materials, home appliances. So I think that's in answer to Ruba.
Great, thank you. The gentleman in the back had a question.
Well, thank you all so much. My name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm a public policy master's student at Duke University here. And I'm curious about some of the hard-to-abate sectors. I know that things like clean hydrogen for heavy transport, for instance, or decarbonization of iron and steel production are areas where there is a lot of need for cutting-edge technology. And I'm just wondering if y'all might be able to briefly comment on any things you see potentially coming down the pike that could help us deal with those really hard-to-abate sectors.
Yeah, you want to?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, we see a lot of these hard to abate, especially in the fuel sector. We see things like aviation fuel, marine fuels, where they might not be as amenable to electrification as maybe light duty vehicles. So we're seeing a lot of movement from some of these, let's say, the shipbuilders and things like that, from the MANs and the Maerks of what are these next generation fuels, and how do we adapt our technologies, be it on engine configurations for our next generation of fuels. These could be fuels like e-methanol, and so how do you adapt existing bunker fuel engines to run on methanol and even ammonia to a certain extent, right? We're seeing a lot of development over there. And on aviation fuel, they're going to be liquid fuel based. So, I think we're looking at some used cooking oil has been the traditional feedstock, but now we're starting to explore other pathways as well.
Maybe I'll just add one or two comments. So first of all, when it comes to heavy vehicle transportation, I think the jury on whether or not hydrogen's the best, let's say, fuel source, I think the jury is still out, right? Because effectively, just the process of producing hydrogen and consuming it, I mean, the turnaround losses are such that there's really a lot of questions around this. But now going to steel, which I think is very much one of the challenging industries to decarbonize. When you look at the pathways that the steel sector has, the most near term is really around energy efficiency, and I think a lot of the large steel conglomerates are going through this right now. But then you're looking at a combination of technologies, you're looking at a combination of techniques, some of them which are retrofittable on existing plants, and some of them will require new plants. So direct reduced iron, whether with gas or with hydrogen, is clearly one direction. Scrap recycling with electric arc furnaces is today the lowest carbon footprint that a steel producer can get to, and steel it's around about 0.5 ton per ton of steel. And when it comes to blast furnaces, which today produce about 70% of the steel globally, you're looking at carbon capture as one, but very much on paper. There's only one facility in the world that has carbon capture retrofitted on a blast furnace, which shows the challenge. And when it comes to the question, why are we not retrofitting these plants? Because today the cost of retrofitting a carbon capture system on a steel plant probably would come to around $200 a ton. So from a steel producing company, the question becomes, okay, I'm going to have to invest $500 million to decarbonize my steel plant. Where does the funding come from? Does it come from a company balance sheet and it will be passed on to the end users, or the end user market going to pay for green steel? And the fact is, this is still an open debate. Some of the sectors, some of the buying sectors on the demand side, the automotive sector, for instance, is starting to pay a premium for green steel for specific parts. Let's say the body of the cars. They accept that they will get low carbon steel at a premium, but fundamentally the steel producing companies are still struggling to make the economics work. How do I justify investing $500 million in decarbonizing my blast furnace? And that debate is a real one, and that's why it's a hard to abate sector, is because these are really the sectors where decarbonization comes at a cost, right?
Maybe I can add another to just add on to what Fred said. As Fred said, 70% of all the steel is made with the blast furnace, and DRI, hydrogen DRI is, I think there was a plant that was just announced in Sweden that's going to go all hydrogen DRI. You have to ask yourself, why are we not seeing more DRI? Well, the ore that you need as the feedstock needs to be of a higher purity, right, for the DRI process. So one of the technologies that you might want to start thinking about now is, can we start looking at other feedstocks? Are there new technologies to purify or start using lower grade ores so that we can start using more DRI? That's a challenge. And
yeah, the U.S. Department of Energy, we heard about during COP, they're moving toward funding more demonstration and deployment projects, and they are funding carbon capture for cement, carbon capture for pulp and paper. And to Fred's point, how are we going to take that next step? We have to build these pilot plants. We have to demonstrate that it works in these industrial processes, and then the hard work comes of, well, then how do you fund it? How do you deploy it? How do we pay for it in implementation? But unless you get the technologies advanced enough to the point where we can have those conversations, that's why DOE funding is critical. So I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've heard great answers. Just the only thing that is, in addition to DOE and all the great work we're doing with the United States, we're also doing it with our partners abroad. We had a number of visits from country leaders to visit the president this year, and you saw in every one of those, there was a joint statement that was issued, and in nearly every one of them, it remarked something about emerging technologies or critical minerals, and created some sort of new partnership between the United States and that country. So it's really a focus area from the president on down to us to be partnering with our allies abroad in terms of decreasing costs, increasing capacity, building scale on these technologies.
So I don't know if we're running around up on time. Do we have time for any more questions or? Nope, we're done. It's 12 o'clock. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panelists. I really appreciate
Thank
great
you.
conversation.
Thank you, everybody.